A sanitation employee, Foreground, helps homeless people with their possessions, as they perform a homeless sweep in New Orleans, in advance of approaching Hurricane Nate, Saturday, October 7, 2017. AP photo Gerald Herbert, New Orleans AP, the latest on Hurricane Nate. All times local 7 p.m. Hurricane Nate has made landfall at the mouth of the Mississippi River as a Category 1 storm with winds of 85 miles per hour, 74 kilometers per hour. The National Hurricane Center said Saturday night that Nate is expected to make a second landfall along the coast of Mississippi on Saturday night and then pass over parts of Mississippi, Alabama and Tennessee. The storm has weakened slightly and is moving north a little slower at 20 miles per hour, 32 kilometers per hour. Evacuations have been ordered along the central Gulf Coast, and people are hunkering down as they wait on the storm. 6 p.m. Officials say they have had to rescue people from 2 sailboats as Hurricane Nate approaches the Gulf Coast, kicking up high waves and winds. The first rescue happened about 12 p.m. Saturday when 2 people had to be helped off a 41-foot sailboat that lost its engine in Lake Pontchartrain. The Coast Guard says both sailors were in stable condition. The second rescue occurred in the Mississippi Sound. Melissa Scallon, a spokeswoman for the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, says a distress call came in around 3 p.m. Saturday after a sailboat struck rocks at Bayou Caddy west of Waveland. Scallon says the State Marine Patrol responded and plucked 3 people from the water. She says they were not hurt. 4:30 p.m. The National Hurricane Center in Miami says Hurricane Nate is about 50 miles south of the mouth of the Mississippi River at Louisiana's southeastern tip. The storm is moving north-northwest toward the Gulf Coast at an unusually fast 23 miles per hour, 37 kilometers per hour. With maximum sustained winds of 90 miles per hour, 150 kilometers per hour, Nate had not gained strength as of the center's 4 p.m. advisory. But forecasters said it might still reach Category 2 strength of 96 miles per hour or more by the time it makes landfall. Nate was on a track that could take it over or near the mouth of the Mississippi by around 7 p.m. on its way to a later landfall on the Louisiana or Mississippi coast, 3 p.m. Officials in Alabama and Mississippi say their states are starting to see impacts from the fast-approaching Hurricane Nate. On Alabama's Dauphin Island, Mayor Jeff Collier reports water had already begun washing over the road on the island's low-lying west end. The city of Gulf Shores, meanwhile, has issued an evacuation order for beachfront properties, and shelters have been opened along the state's coastal counties. In Mississippi, State Emergency Management Director Lee Smithson said 67 people were already in shelters in 2 coastal counties while strong winds and high tides were driving Gulf of Mexico waters over roads near the Louisiana state line. And Gov. Phil Bryant say the state's National Guard has mobilized 75 soldiers and the Highway Patrol has moved an additional 60 state troopers into South Mississippi. 2:20 p.m. Airports in some southern states are closing in anticipation of Hurricane Nate. The Pensacola International Airport in Florida and the Mobile Regional Airport in Alabama say they are closing Saturday before the storm makes landfall. The Florida airport said it will close by 6 p.m., remain closed through Sunday and hopefully resume operations Monday morning. Officials at the Alabama airport said they hope to reopen Sunday around noon. Officials at the airport say passengers should contact their airlines for information about rebooking flights. 1:45 p.m. More than 40% of manned oil and gas-producing platforms in the Gulf of Mexico have been evacuated, according to an update from the Interior Department, as Hurricane Nate churns toward the U.S. mainland. The department said Saturday that workers were evacuated from 312 of the 737 manned platforms in the Gulf. Crews also have been taken off 13 of 20 manned drilling rigs and other rigs have been moved out of the storm's path. About 1/5 of U.S. oil is produced in the Gulf. The platforms mostly avoided Hurricane Harvey in late August. Nate is speeding north-northwest over the Gulf of Mexico. Forecasters say the hurricane is expected to make landfall Saturday night along the central U.S. Gulf Coast, likely with Category 2 strength, 1 p.m. Governors in Louisiana and Florida are urging residents to make final preparations for Hurricane Nate's impending arrival. In Louisiana, Gov. John Bel Edwards said Saturday that people in the southeastern part of the state should hunker down by 3 p.m. He says the storm's eye is expected to make landfall about 4 hours later, likely bringing limited rain but powerful storm surges and strong winds. The state National Guard, meanwhile, has mobilized 1,300 troops and positioned high-water vehicles, boats and even school buses from Baton Rouge to New Orleans to help with rescues. Edwards said he also spoke with President Trump Saturday morning, who assured him the federal government was prepared to respond as well. In Florida, Gov. Rick Scott said the roughly 100,000 residents in evacuation zones should heed warnings, stick to their emergency plan and stay vigilant for updates from local officials. He said the hurricane could bring not just storm surges and strong winds to the Panhandle, but also tornadoes. 12 p.m. Early voting is wrapping up sooner than scheduled in parts of Louisiana because of Hurricane Nate. Meg Casper-Sundstrom, spokeswoman for the Secretary of State's office, said voters in some southeastern parishes will have until 3 p.m. on Saturday to cast their ballots early. The parishes affected are in the New Orleans area, including Orleans, St. Bernard, Plaquemines and St. Tammany parishes. Early voting will continue to close at 6 p.m. in the state's other parishes. Saturday is the last day of the week-long early voting period. Louisiana has a statewide election October 14th, and New Orleans has a highly contested mayor's race on the ballot, 11 p.m. The National Weather Service is placing much of Alabama under a tropical storm warning. Forecasters said Saturday that Hurricane Nate could bring wind gusts of up to 60 miles per hour, 95 kilometers per hour across much of the central part of the state, which includes Birmingham, the state's largest city. The storm is expected to down trees and cause significant power outages. Isolated tornadoes were also possible Sunday afternoon. On Alabama's Gulf Coast, some communities have already imposed mandatory curfews from Saturday evening through Sunday morning. They've also ordered beaches and fishing piers closed and issued voluntary evacuation orders. On Florida's Panhandle, officials have ordered evacuations in some lowly areas. They're also warning beachgoers to stay out of the Gulf of Mexico as the storm is already whipping up deadly rip currents and rough surf. 12 p.m. Flood-prone underpasses in New Orleans will be blocked to traffic in anticipation of possible heavy rain from Hurricane Nate. Mayor Mitch Landrieu made the announcement Saturday as Nate was moving swiftly toward the northern Gulf Coast. Motorists who stall their cars while trying to drive through high water at the underpasses are a recurring problem during heavy rains. The move to block access to underpasses comes as the city works to fix recently revealed weaknesses in its drainage system. Nate was on a forecast track taking it past Louisiana's southeast tip by around 7 p.m., heading for an expected Mississippi landfall. Among precautions in Mississippi, transportation officials say highway crews are lowering the high masts that hold street lights to keep the lights from becoming projectiles in expected high winds. 1145 a.m. Some oil and gas platforms in the Gulf of Mexico are being shut down as Hurricane Nate churns toward the U.S. mainland. Federal officials said Friday that workers were evacuated from 66 oil and gas-producing platforms in the Gulf, about 9% of the total of manned facilities. The Interior Department says crews also have been taken off 5 drilling rigs and other rigs have been moved out of the storm's path. About only a fifth of U.S. oil is produced in the Gulf. The platforms mostly avoided Hurricane Harvey in late August. Nate is speeding north-northwest over the central Gulf of Mexico as a Category 1 hurricane. Forecasters say the hurricane is expected to make landfall Saturday night along the central U.S. Gulf Coast, 10 a.m. Strengthening Hurricane Nate is now expected to be a Category 2 hurricane at landfall on the central Gulf Coast in coming hours. The National Hurricane Center in Miami says Nate's top sustained winds have recently risen to 90 miles per hour, 150 kilometers per hour, and the core is now about 180 miles, 285 kilometers south-southeast of the mouth of the Mississippi River. As of 10 a.m. CDT Saturday, Nate was accelerating to 26 miles per hour, 43 kilometers per hour, and headed north-northwest on a course expected to take it onto the central Gulf Coast on Saturday night. Forecasters say the hurricane force winds extend out up to 35 miles, 55 kilometers per hour, mainly to the east of the eye. In addition to hurricane warnings and tropical storm warnings already in place along a wide stretch of Gulf Coast, a new tropical storm warning has been issued in the Florida Panhandle from east of the Okaloosa-Walton County line to Indian Pass, Florida. 945 a.m. Louisiana Gov. John Bell Edwards says President Donald Trump has approved a pre-disaster emergency declaration for 17 parishes. Edwards said Saturday morning he spoke with Trump as Hurricane Nate headed for the Gulf Coast. Nate's forecast track would take it past the southeastern tip of Louisiana Saturday evening, heading for a landfall on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. But forecasters warned people from eastern Louisiana and into Alabama to be on alert for the storm's effects. Louisiana's Lafourche Fouche Parish is the latest to order a mandatory evacuation. Officials there ordered a mandatory evacuation of part of the town of Golden Meadow Saturday morning. The Mississippi Emergency Management Agency announced the opening of shelters on the coast Saturday. Alabama also was opening shelters for coastal residents. 8:15 a.m. President Donald Trump has approved an emergency declaration for a large area of Louisiana and ordered federal assistance for the state as Hurricane Nate approaches the central Gulf of Mexico. A White House statement released early Saturday said the president authorized the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the Department of Homeland Security to coordinate all federal disaster relief efforts. The statement says the move is intended to speed aid, save lives and protect property and public safety in the region. It specifically identifies 17 parishes, many in coastal Louisiana. The statement comes as Nate is speeding north-northwest over the central Gulf of Mexico as a Category 1 hurricane. Forecasters say the hurricane is expected to make landfall Saturday night along the central U.S. Gulf Coast. 8 a.m. Hurricane Nate has gotten a little stronger as it races across the central Gulf of Mexico. The U.S. National Hurricane Center in Miami said Nate is moving toward the north-northwest at about 22 miles per hour, 35 kilometers per hour, and the core of the hurricane is expected to make landfall Saturday night on the U.S. Gulf Coast. The center says a Hurricane Hunter aircraft found maximum sustained winds in the Category 1 storm have risen to near 85 miles per hour, 135 kilometers per hour, with higher gusts. Forecasters say some more strengthening is possible before Nate makes landfall. At 8 a.m. EDT Saturday, Nate was centered about 245 miles 395 kilometers south-southeast of the mouth of the Mississippi River. A hurricane warning is in effect from Grand Isle, Louisiana, to the Alabama-Florida border as well as for the New Orleans metro area and nearby Lake Pontchartrain. 4:18 a.m. The National Hurricane Center says Hurricane Nate continues rapidly moving over the central Gulf of Mexico. The Miami-based center says in its 4 a.m. CDT update that the storm had maximum sustained winds of 80 miles per hour, 128.74 kilometers per hour. The storm was located about 345 miles 555.2 kilometers south-southeast of the mouth of the Mississippi River and was moving north-northwest at 22 miles per hour 35 kilometers per hour. Forecasters say Nate likely will reach the U.S. Gulf Coast near New Orleans late Saturday, and Louisiana ordered some people to evacuate coastal areas and barrier islands ahead of its expected landfall Saturday night or early Sunday. Evacuations began at some offshore oil platforms in the Gulf. Mississippi's government said it would open 11 evacuation shelters in areas away from the immediate coast, with buses available for people who can't drive. 1:15 a.m. The National Hurricane Center says Hurricane Nate is heading toward the central Gulf of Mexico and is likely to reach the U.S. Gulf Coast over the weekend. The Miami-based center says the storm had maximum sustained winds of 80 miles per hour, 128.74 kilometers per hour, and was likely to strengthen over the Gulf of Mexico, reaching the U.S. Gulf Coast near New Orleans late Saturday. Louisiana and Mississippi officials declared states of state of emergency, and Louisiana ordered some people to evacuate coastal areas and barrier islands ahead of its expected landfall Saturday night or early Sunday. Evacuations began at some offshore oil platforms in the Gulf. Mississippi's government said it would open 11 evacuation shelters in areas away from the immediate coast, with buses available for people who can't drive. Related